I'm going to start this video with two statements. Number one, I have 3 sons and I always wanted and imagined that I'd have a daughter. Number two, I really dislike the term gender disappointment. I think when you're going through one of the most confusing and conflicting emotional things you can go through during pregnancy, it's really not great to add that extra layer of guilt by labelling something disappointing when that doesn't really accurately describe what I went through anyway. There was never any disappointment in any of my boys. I always wanted them. I'd never ever want to swap them for a girl. But just alongside that, there was a second set of emotions that I was experiencing, which were the sort of loss of this idea that I'd had in my head that I would have a daughter one day. I think by calling it gender disappointment, that makes it so hard for people who have been through those emotions to sort of stand up and say, yeah, I experienced that, because it sounds like such a harsh final sort of statement, and it sounds to me like you're saying things that aren't necessarily true. If I was to stand up and say I had gender disappointment, to me that feels like I am saying I didn't want my boys. I'd be worried about them hearing me say that, the implications of that, what does that mean for them, and I would be worried that people would assume that I'm absolutely gutted about my life and my children, and that's not at all the case. So yeah, I think the term gender disappointment is really lacking. I think we should call it something else. So let's start at the beginning. When I was pregnant with my first, I didn't really have any indication of whether it was a girl or a boy. I've never been very good at that, and I've never had any strong feelings either way. And then he arrived, and obviously he is a boy. And yeah, I didn't even think twice about the boy-girl thing. It was just, oh, he's a boy. It was my first, so it was just exciting to have one or the other. And then when I was pregnant with Rory, I had suffered 3 early miscarriages before I got pregnant with Rory. So to be honest, his pregnancy, I was just preoccupied with keeping the pregnancy going and hoping that everything would be okay, and I wasn't at all thinking about would I like a girl, would I like a boy. It wasn't in my thoughts at all. But I did have a lot of people comment on the fact that we must want a girl. A lot of people said, I'm sure it's a girl this time, I've just got a feeling. I think in my head I'd built up that maybe he was a girl just because of the amount of talk surrounding his pregnancy. Anyway, he came out and Sam told me he was a boy, and I knew straight away what I wanted to call him, and I kind of knew. I was like, oh, of course he's a boy. That's sort of what I knew, and you know, I just, in my head, it was like, okay, that makes sense, he's another boy. Because I knew all along that I wanted a big family, I wanted at least 3 children, I assumed somewhere along the line that one of those would be a girl, that we'd have a bit of a mix. I did not imagine that we'd have 3 boys when we started off this whole childbearing process, but yeah, there we go, we have 3 boys. So in the early weeks after Rory's birth, there were a few moments where I would sort of sit and think like, wow, how are you a boy? You're not my girl. This is not really what I imagined. And I have to say that those feelings were slightly uncomfortable to have at that point, when I just wanted to be able to have a clear head and to enjoy my newborn and to bond with him. And I had this sort of set of conflicting emotions that were like just niggling in the background of that, just because I didn't really imagine that I'd have 2 boys, and there I was with 2 boys and this list of girls' names that I still wasn't getting to use, and I had to do a bit of readjusting in my head at that stage. So baby number 3, obviously he is Otto, and he is a boy as well. With Otto, he is the only one that we've found out during pregnancy the gender. The other 2 we waited until they were born to find out, but because of the sort of weird emotions that I experienced just after Rory was born, I knew that I had to find out with Otto. I had to know if he was going to be another boy. I knew I'd need time to kind of process that in my head, and I just had to know. We had agreed by this point that we would be having 3 children, and that would be it. There's lots of reasons for this, and that's kind of for another vlog, but mainly it's to do with, you know, house sizes, where we live, financial reasons, and just I think Sam and I both felt that 3 was enough for us, and you know, that was going to be it. So this baby was the last one, and I knew that I had basically one more shot to have a girl, and at this point I'd kind of look at all boy families, and it would sort of scare me a little bit, because I'd be like, oh, that could be us. I'm not sure if I want that to be us. And yeah, I'd kind of feel this sort of strange aversion to all boy families, which seems really silly, but that's what was going on in my head. So we booked an early gender scan. I was 16 weeks, which is, I think they say, is like the earliest you can sort of find out for definite. One thing I would say at this point is that if you know you're going to need time to adjust to whatever the sonographer tells you, don't tell your family in advance that you're going to find out the gender. I didn't do this, but Sam mentioned it, and as a result we had people immediately, they knew we were going on the day, and then obviously they wanted to know straight afterwards, and I wasn't in the right headspace. I needed a good 2 or 3 weeks to sort of come round to the fact that he was another boy, and it felt quite uncomfortable knowing that we had people waiting with expectations, and I needed to put on like a smile and kind of announce it, you know, be just kind of emotionally level, and I wasn't quite there. I remember this really weird phase after we found out, of probably about 2 or 3 weeks, where everyone asked, have you found out? And to people who didn't know that we had found out, I'd say no, we don't know yet, because I just wasn't ready to stand there with a genuine smile on my face and say it's another boy. When you have 2 or 3 or more of the same gender, people's expectations, they will let you know that they want to see you. People said to me, oh, we'd love to see you have a girl, you know, and I felt like this sort of, I felt like I was disappointing people by saying, oh, he's another boy, and yeah, it was sort of like, until I felt emotionally okay with it, I felt like I couldn't stand in front of other people and tell them that he was a boy without feeling emotionally shaken by that. So I wanted to wait until I was totally confident, and you know, it's just a horrible thing to sort of have someone excitedly like, oh, so is it a girl or a boy? And you're like, it's a boy. And it kind of, that I felt like they could see visibly in my reaction that I maybe wasn't 100% okay with that at this stage, and because I'm the sort of person who doesn't like to wear my emotions on my sleeve, that was just a level too far for me. There were also a fair few times when I told people he was a boy, when we had some not very nice responses. One in particular, I remember the person on the other end of the phone just went, oh okay, that's a shame. And I mean, it's just horrible, isn't it? Like, which actually, this made me and Sam even more protective over Otto, and I bonded with him really well during pregnancy, because I was so emotional about the fact that anyone could think his announcement was less exciting than it would have been if he'd been a girl, and I felt really kind of bad for him, and I was like, well, if other people aren't excited about your arrival, then I'm going to be 10 times more excited about it. So that was kind of a weirdly nice aspect of it, if I had to pull anything that was nice out of this time. Sam had probably worse responses than I did. I think a lot of people knew that they probably shouldn't say this stuff around me. A few people had no filter, but most people knew that they shouldn't. Sam got the brunt of the sort of not very nice responses, and we got so many, oh, you'll almost have a 5-a-side team, or like, it was just ridiculous. Everyone thinks they're saying something unique when they comment, and they're all just saying the same things. Anyway, I kind of gone off on tangent here. Let's go back to finding out. So we went to the local scanning place to have the gender scan, and if I'm honest, I expected that they would tell us that he was a boy. I thought, if they say girl, I'm going to be incredibly surprised and happy, because deep down that's kind of what I wanted, 2 boys and then a girl. But I figured it was going to be boy. If I had to bet on it, I would have said boy. Arlo wanted it to be a girl because there were no girls in the family, so he was gunning for girl. Rory thought boy, but he didn't really understand what was going on. Sam refused to guess, and I went with boy as well, just to sort of, I thought I'd be covering my kind of expectation disappointment if I said, oh, I know it's a boy. So yeah, I said I think it's a boy, we're just destined to have all boys. I've never actually looked at that area in the scan, because with my older two we didn't find out, so we purposefully like looked away for that bit. But with Otto, it was just unmistakable. There's just no mistake, there is a willy there. So we left the scan room, and for the first day I was sort of just relieved to know. I was like, oh, of course it's a boy, like that, okay, relief, move on, let's start thinking about names, because that was a whole another difficult conversation, because when you've named two boys it's really hard to name another one. And then over that next week I had this sort of slow like adjustment, this dawning of like, that means that I'm never having a daughter, and that was hard to kind of adjust to. And that, when I talk about gender disappointment, that's what it is for me. It was that kind of loss of an idea that wasn't going to happen anymore, and it was sort of like a saying goodbye to the other option. Because when you're pregnant, up until the point you find out, you're assuming both. You kind of have this picture in your head of a boy and you have this picture in your head of a girl, and you assume both right up until the point when they're born or when you find out during the scan. And at the point you find out, you then have to say goodbye to the option that isn't happening. And for me, this was quite a long process. It took a long time, and I mean, to be honest, I'm still processing it. I'm still like, I find it so strange to think that I won't have a daughter, and I'm kind of not cool with that, because I really wanted that experience. I wanted the mother-daughter experience. I wanted to see from like this weird innate biological desire to see like what the girl version of me looks like, as opposed to all the little boy versions of me and Sam that we have. And I wanted to see Sam as a dad so much. I really wanted to see him be a dad to a girl, and sort of just, yeah, how that dynamic would be different or the same as with our boys. And I started to have all these really sort of incredibly petty realizations during this weird mourning phase for the girl that I wasn't going to have. So I'd suddenly be like, oh, it means Sam never gets to do a father of the bride speech. I never get to see him sort of have that proud emotional moment where he kind of stands up and talks about his daughter that he loves. And it's just, things like that is just so silly, because it's such a hypothetical, because we might have a daughter who doesn't want to get married, we might have a daughter who doesn't want to do any wedding speeches, it's up to her. But in my head it was just all these tiny insignificant moments that we were now going to miss out on, and each one was like a little bit of a sort of mourning. Because gender disappointment is such a complex topic and emotion, I felt like I couldn't really tell anyone what I was feeling. I did tell Sam, he was the only one who really kind of knew how I felt about it, but I didn't tell anyone else. I had a few conversations with other people who had all the same sex children, because I felt like that was my safe space, that they would understand what I was saying and that they wouldn't misinterpret it and assume I was saying I didn't want Otto that I was carrying at the time, or that I was upset that my other children weren't girls. I felt like these people will understand the complex emotions that you go through when this happens to you. But yeah, other than that, I kept it under wraps, and I am doing this video. I want to speak to the people who felt like me, who've been through this, and I want to let you know that it is okay to feel like this, and not to push those emotions away, because if you push them down, you don't get over it. I started to get over it once I had allowed myself to kind of go through that mourning period, and I really went into it and went through all the little petty insignificant things like the wedding stuff that wouldn't now happen. I let myself take it all in, process it, accept it, be emotional about it, and then it gave me the freedom to start thinking about my boy who was going to arrive and moving on. In those early weeks after we found out, I honestly felt like I wasn't sure I was going to get over this and move on from it. And that for me felt really, I felt so guilty. I felt like I should be enjoying my pregnancy after losing 3 pregnancies, and, you know, knowing that I was so lucky to even have 3 children, 3 healthy pregnancies. It felt really bad to be feeling upset about something that in the grand scheme of things is really very minor. But that is the thing with gender disappointment. That is how it makes you feel, and it makes you feel like you have to push down those feelings and you have to say, I know I'm lucky and this isn't important, when really I honestly think you need to say, no, this is important, this is important to me, and I need to accept these feelings and process them. I am really glad that we found out about Otto during pregnancy and didn't wait until he was born like we did with the other 2. I just know that I would have had all that emotional adjustment during the newborn phase, and I didn't want that. That would have been horrible. So by the time he was born, I was 100% adjusted to the fact that he was a boy, and I felt completely just excited and ready for him. How do I feel now about it? Otto's now 10 months old. I look at my all-boy family and I just think, well, that is just the way it was meant to be, wasn't it? And I think it's so lovely for them. I can see such a closeness between Arlo and Rory, and I'm sure that as Otto gets older, he's going to follow in their footsteps, and I take huge comfort in the fact that I'm going to have this close band of brothers to look out for each other and to share common interests and go down to the pub with each other and be best men at each other's weddings. I'm going on about weddings again, I don't know why. There are a lot of positives, and it's not really about my boys at all. The gender stuff is all about my expectations and not about the children that I have. And I am still adjusting to the fact that I don't have a girl, and I probably won't have a girl. That is still something that I come back to every now and again in my thoughts, and I think I will do probably for the rest of my life. That's just the way it is. But the huge emotional turmoil that I felt in the early weeks when we found out that we were going to have an all-boy family, that's gone now. That's not there anymore. And if you're watching this and you're in the midst of that turmoil, then I hope that you can take comfort in my experience, because it does go away, it does get better, and you won't always be feeling as emotionally raw as you are now. And I've been there, I know how that feels, and I know that it's just one of the worst feelings that you can have. I have blogged about this topic before, and I've probably done it a lot more eloquently than this vlog, because you know, I really thought through my emotions and poured them out onto paper, whereas this is just kind of a spur of the moment vlog that I've decided to do. So I'm going to leave the link to my blog post in the description box. Go and have a read of that. It's a positive gender disappointment story, with also a dose of realism and honesty about how I genuinely felt and still do feel about the fact that I have 3 boys and I always wanted a daughter and I don't have one. So these days I get a lot of people still commenting on the fact that we have all boys. It comes up in everyday conversation all the time, with supermarket checkout people, just taxi drivers, everywhere, and I always steel myself for that conversation, because it generally goes the same. It goes, you know, if I've got 2 of the boys with me, or if I've got 3 of them or just 1, they'll say like, oh, how many children? And I'll say 3, and they'll say, oh right, so 2 boys and a girl? No, all boys. Oh, all boys. Oh, okay. And then I have to do this sort of like, yeah, all boys kind of smile, because what else do you do? Go, yeah, like, I mean, I don't know what's expected of me in that situation. And then occasionally you get people who get it and sort of have a better response, and I always feel quite refreshed by those conversations because they're quite rare, but they're very nice when they happen. Not that I care about how other people think, but when I know internally I have some of the same thoughts, and then someone else voices that or kind of brings that emotional conflict to attention and wants me to confront it with something they say, then I feel like, oh, people are gonna know how I feel about it, they're going to be able to see into my response. So then the importance is on my response and having to be really kind of like cool about it. But the thing that you need to remember is that you cannot win in other people's eyes, because I've had this conversation so many times where people say, oh, 3 children, that's brave, oh, I couldn't have more than 2. But the same person will ask me if I'm gonna keep trying for a girl, or just assume that I will keep trying until we get a girl. So you really can't win. People either think you're mad for having more than 2 children, or you're mad to try and not keep procreating until you get the combination that you want. It is completely insane, and people will always just be insensitive when they comment. They're going to touch a nerve, it's going to happen. Seeing as I don't like calling it gender disappointment, I am going to call it a readjusting of gender expectations. If you're watching this and you have felt these feelings, I hope that you feel after watching my vlog that it's okay to speak about it. It's okay to tell your partner, or even just to write it down. Write down your emotions, read them, spend time with them, confront those uncomfortable feelings, and just know that other people have been through it. And I know it's such a hard thing to talk about. It's a hard thing to talk about emotionally, and it's a hard thing because the term sounds so harsh and so unrepresentative of those really complex, conflicting emotions. If you feel like you can talk about your experiences, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Every time someone else has admitted to me that they felt similar, or that there's been an adjustment period, I've felt so much better, because it makes me feel like I'm not the only one. And it's something that people do not talk about a lot, so it's always really refreshing to hear when someone says, yes, me too. Thank you for watching. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd also love it if you wanted to subscribe to my channel.